Okay, I'm going to show you some bead embroidery techniques. What you're looking at right now are some bead embroidery projects. This right here is a cuff bracelet. You can see the embroidery work on it. This also is a cuff bracelet that has been embroidered. It's actually very multi-dimensional. I'm not going to get into the advanced techniques today, but I just want you to see some results that you can get with bead embroidery. And this was kind of a fun, funky project. These are puzzle pieces that have been bead embroidered around. So you can see the back side. That's the back side right there. I would not call myself a bead embroidery expert. These are just a few projects that I've done, and I'm going to show you the techniques that I use when I do bead embroidery. So first of all, you're going to want to start off with the pieces that you want to use for your embroidery. You don't have to have focal pieces. I typically will use some type of focal piece. This is a piece of turquoise. It actually is a bead that has a hole in it. I'm not sure if you're able to see that in there because of the darkness, but there is a hole. It's actually right there that goes all the way through the bead. You can use other types of beads. They don't have to be you know, oddly shaped. These are some beads that I've used in bead embroidery. You can use cabochons. Cabochons are basically beads that have been sliced and the back of them is flat, as opposed to a bead like this that is not flat on the back. I mean, it hasn't been sliced. This also has a hole in it that you can see right there on the end that I'm actually going to use to demonstrate the bead embroidery on. But when you're selecting your focal beads, it does need to be something that for embroidery that can be glued onto some type of backing. This piece, you can see I've glued on a piece of interfacing. I know a lot of beaders like to use different kinds of interfacing. There are several on the market. This is called Lacey's Stiff Stuff. It is a thicker interfacing. A lot of times beaders will use this for cuff bracelets. It's very heavy and it actually works up pretty nicely, but sometimes the projects that I do, I don't want that stiffness, so I'll just go and get some regular old interfacing that you would use for sewing. You can get this at any fabric store. And it's pretty inexpensive. So depending on the project will depend on what type of interfacing I use. You can also bead embroidery on just regular plain old fabric. If you're going to embroider on fabric, I would recommend either using some interfacing, and this kind that I have right here in my hand has glue on it that when you heat it with an iron, it'll actually adhere right to the fabric, and that'll give you some stiffness there. Or I would encourage you to use an embroidery hoop just to keep your work laying real nice. But today we're going to talk about embroidering for jewelry, which is typically done on interfacing. So once you've selected your bead, there's really two trains of thought. There is using a pattern, which you can create your own pattern. You can draw a pattern. You can purchase patterns, or you can do more of a freestyle. I'm more of a freestyle girl. I don't follow patterns very well. So what I'm going to demonstrate today will be more of a freestyle, and I may do a tutorial on how to do a beading pattern for bead embroidery at a later time. Okay, so once you've selected your bead, you need to get your bead glued down to the piece of interfacing. My favorite glue is E6000. It's pretty versatile, easy to work with, dries fairly quickly. Just follow the instructions on the back. Use a generous amount so that the entire back of the bead is covered, and you'll stick that down to your interfacing. So I actually did this previously, and you can see it's stuck on there. I can't pull that puppy off. So okay, so now we're ready to start our embroidery. What I have here is some fire line. If you don't know what fire line is actually fishing line. So one of my favorite things to do when we go to the sporting goods store, my husband's looking at, you know, all the man stuff he wants to look at, is I go over to the fishing section and, you know, look like a real outdoors girl by picking up some Fireline. Fireline comes in two colors that you'll use for beading. This is the crystal clear, and you can see it's not actually clear. There's kind of a white color to it. This is a 6-pound test. It comes in all different weights. The weight will tell you how thick the fishing line is. I typically use either 4-pound, 6-pound, or 8-pound test for beading. If you're going to use really tiny beads, size 15 seed beads or micro beads, you'll definitely want to stick with a lower test. And then the other color is smoke. Smoke is kind of well, it starts off black, but the more you work with it, it almost turns like a gray color the more it's worked. This is 8-pound test, and you can see that there. So I've cut a piece of Fireline. I've strung it through my beading needle. I have no idea what size beading needle this is. I typically use 12s and 13s. Occasionally I'll use a 10. But I go through beading needles a lot, and I really don't track the size, so sorry about that. But okay, so I'm going to start off at the end of my thread, and this is one of the few times where I'm going to give you permission to go ahead and just tie a regular old slip knot in the end. So I'm going to come around and come through my loop like I'm tying a knot, and then I'm going to go through a second time. This is going to end up on the back of the work, and when this is finished, you'll never see the knot. So go ahead and you can just snug that down so you have a nice little knot there. Then we're going to come in through the back side, right up close next to the bead, and I'm going to poke my needle in through the interfacing and come up through the top. Now, normally I probably would not be using smoke colored Fireline. I'm doing that for demonstrative purposes today so you can see what I'm doing, and hopefully the thread will show up. And I'm also going to use pretty large seed beads here. I'm using size 6 seed beads. Normally I would not be using that size of seed bead, but again, I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to come in and pick up 4 of these seed beads with my needle. Bring those down to the end, and then I'm going to just lay those right up next to that main focal bead. I'm going to come in right here and go, see how I've snugged those up? I've just laid them. I'm going to go straight down at the end of that bead. And I'll pull my thread through the back. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up through the back side, and I want my needle positioned right in between, right in the middle between beads 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Okay, so can you see where I've pulled that needle up from the back? I'm going to pull that straight up, and then I'm going to come in through beads number 3 and 4 and go straight out the end. And what that does is that, first of all, it secures your beads really nicely. See if I can get a better camera shot here. I'm not the best camera pro. But you can see that snugs the beads right up next to those. And then what it also will do is as I pick up my next beads, let me pick up 4 more. And as I repeat this, it's going to snug those beads right up to the first 4 that I put on as I repeat that pattern. So I'm going to come in, go straight down, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come in right in between those beads from the back. This does take a little bit of practice. I've done a lot of bead embroidery, and you know you'll get in the groove to where it'll start to go pretty quickly as you get that flow. Okay, so there you can see. Boy, and I thought that was going to look ugly. I kind of like that. I like that color combo on there, even with the larger beads. Okay, then as you come in for your next row, you'll treat this row of beads just like you treated your focal bead. Now I want to show you, this is a project that is just about finished, but you can see I started with the first first row of beads in there were these little teeny tiny number 15 seed beads. And then I followed that with a row of number 11s. And then I followed those with some size 8 beads on this side. And then I changed it up and got real funky over here and did some different stitching. Even used some crystals and different things in there and filled all of this in. And again, you know, on another tutorial, I'll probably do some patterns and talk about those a little bit more, but I wanted to cover the basics today. Okay, so once you have your bead beaded, and I want to show you, this is a completely different style here. This is one where I actually went up on the sides of the bead, but this has been beaded to the point where I'm ready to put it on the backing. Okay, so once you've finished, you can go ahead and knot your thread on the back side. In fact, let me demonstrate that real quick, what you can do. Let's say I was finished with this project. I'm just going to end it on the back of the interfacing, so I'll come down, and then what I do is come in and just pick up a little bit of that interfacing in toward the middle of the bead, and you'll probably be poking through a little bit of the glue as well. But I'll pick up a little bit of that, and whoops, I picked up so little I ripped right through it. Sometimes I don't know my own strength. Let's try this again. Get in there. I'll try and be a little bit more gentle this time. But you want to come in, and I'm just going to do, oh, it's because I have a knot in my thread. That would be part of the problem. Typically when you get a knot, it's actually just your threads are wound around each other. There we go. Okay, so I want to come in, and as I work that loop down, I'm just going to put my needle right through it, and that'll create a little knot. And you don't have to get crazy about your knots or worry about the security of those too much, because what we're going to do, and then I would just come in and trim this little tail off and just snip that right there. But what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our E6000, and I'm going to trim off around the edge here with my scissors that I can't find right now. There. Grab a pair of scissors. Snip off my little tail so you can see that. And then what I would do is I would come in and I would trim really close to those beads. So on this one right here, you'll see I'm just going to come in and I'm going to trim right around. Now, some people cut from the back side. I do my work pretty close. What you don't want to do is you don't want to cut any of the threads that you've worked on the back, because if you cut one of the threads, guess what's going to happen? All your beads are going to fall all over the floor, and that is never fun. So I always cut my interfacing from the front side. Okay, that's all trimmed off. So the next step that you're going to do is you're going to take your E6000 and you're going to glue this onto your backing. Now, there's a lot of different options for backing. A lot of people use ultra suede. I've used ultra suede before. This puzzle bracelet was actually, I used ultra suede with that. My preferred backing is leather. I love leather. I love the way it feels. I love the way it looks. I think it gives a real professional finished look to the back. You can get leather that has a sheen to it. You can get some of the softer leathers. Grab this piece of gray leather here. I think this piece is just absolutely beautiful. And the cool thing about leather is on the other side is suede. So if you wanted, you know, that soft suede side to be on the outside, you could always glue onto the leather side. So what we would do at this point is you're going to take the bead that you just cut out, and you're going to glue that with the E6000 right onto your backing, whether you use fabric or whether you use leather. Now, micro suede is woven in such a way that when you cut it, the edges won't ravel. Obviously, you know, leather's not going to ravel. You don't want to use any kind of fabric that will unravel, because that'll create problems when you are stitching the edge. But you can get a little bit creative with this. My biggest complaint about ultra suede is sometimes the E6000 will, I wouldn't call it bleed through, but it will leave a coloring on the back side and kind of make the fabric shiny, and I don't really care for that. Also, you know, when you're talking about jewelry and fabric and cleanability, you know, I'm not a germaphobe, but I like something that I can wipe off, and that's why I really do like the leather. So, okay, so once you have your beadwork glued down and that has dried, I have some little beads here that I've done that I'm working on a project for. You're going to come in and you're going to trim around the edge, kind of like you did with the, so I can get this on camera, just like I did with the interfacing. So you're going to just trim right around the edge. And now you can kind of see why those little threads that you've cut off the back, why they don't matter so much. I used to be real fussy, and I would tuck in all the thread ends and make sure, you know, they were in there. And then I realized one day it didn't make a difference. So I lightened up a little bit. So you can see here's a couple that I've already pre-cut out. And so now we're ready to put the bead edge on those. So you can see if you can see on here on the camera. There's my leather layer. You can see a little bit of the interfacing poking out, and then you can see the beads right there. Now I want to talk about one other thing real quick that I didn't address earlier that I want to talk about now. When you're using interfacing instead of a colored fabric, white isn't always the color of choice that you want for your background, because you know, if there's any kind of gappage between the beads, that white's going to show through. So my little trick is these lovely Sharpies. I love Sharpies for a lot of different projects, but you can use a Sharpie to color the interfacing. Here is a bead some beadwork that I've already done, and I don't know if you'll be able to see this on camera real well. Let me see if I can get it in an angle where you can see. Can you see a little bit of that interfacing poking out? Well, this brown in here, I actually embroidered with embroidery thread. So there's some thread in there. And I know when I do my edge work, that white's going to pop out and poke through. So what I'm going to do is come in here with my Sharpie, and I'm just going to just kiss that edge a little bit with the end of my Sharpie, and that's going to hide that interfacing. Now you can do this at any time in your embroidery work. There are times when, as I'm embroidering, if I'm going to do a larger bead, and you know, maybe it's a red bead, and you know, some red beading work, and that white's really poking through the back, I'll grab a red Sharpie and I'll just color right on the interfacing, and that helps kind of create the illusion that there are no gaps in between your beadwork. So I'm just coming around and coloring all those edges, and I think I'm already around. So there we go. I got rid of all that white pretty well, and now we're ready to bead on the edge. Okay, so to bead on the edge, get my needle out here, you can do a couple of different things. There are some all different beading stitches, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. I'm trying to find the beads I want to use on the edge of this, and I'm not seeing them right now, so I'm just going to let me grab these right here and show you what you can do on the edge. Now when I start the thread on here, we're back to, you know, what's going to be the best technique for this particular project. And there's two different things you can do. You can either just leave a tail and worry about knotting and burying it at the end, or you can tie a knot to start with. So I want to show you the technique where you tie a knot to start with. We're going to do just like what we did on the back. We're going to come in, and I probably should be using white thread so you can see this. Let me do that. I've got some crystal right here. So we're going to do a knot just like we did at the beginning of our embroidery. I'm going to come through here twice. Put my little knot. Now on this one, I'm going to trim my tail down. Okay, there's my knot right there. I'm just going to trim my tail to about right there. I don't want a very long tail. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let me show you on this one. I'm going to come in here and I'm putting my needle through about 5 or 6 beads. Actually, let me pick up 2 more right here. Okay, so you can see my thread pulling through. And before I pull it all the way through, I'm going to poke that straight down. And I'm going to go through the interfacing, and I'm going through that leather. And what's going to happen is that tail is going to be hidden in those beads, but I'm going to pull it really snug, and that knot is catching right in there, but it completely hides it. Okay, that's probably the technique I use most frequently. I know some beaders, are probably saying bad things about me right now, but the other technique would be to leave the tail out, do your beadwork, and then secure your 2 tails together at the end. So, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come right back in right next to where I went in. Not the same hole, I'm actually creating a new hole. And yes, going through leather is a little bit challenging. I'm not going to lie about that. But if you have good, sharp beading needles, you shouldn't have a problem. Okay, so I'm now back through the front side. I'm going to pick up 2 beads. And I hope these are big enough that you can see. You know what? I'm going to use these red ones. It's not going to turn out the way, but for demonstrative purposes, I think you'll get the idea. So I'm going to come in here. I have my 2 beads. Okay. I'm going to lay those beads down right next to each other. And I'm only doing that to gauge my distance. Okay. So I've got those 2 beads laying right down together. I'm coming through the front side of the interfacing, back through the leather. Okay. And it's okay that my beads are dangling down there. And then on the second bead, I'm going to come right up through the bottom and out through the top. Okay. I'm going to pick up 1 bead, and I'm going to go through the front of the interfacing, and until you kind of can gauge the distance, you may want to, put your bead there next to it and figure out about where the center of the hole is. Again, I've been beading a long time, so I can gauge the distance pretty easily. Poke down through the interfacing and through the leather. Okay, and then right back up through the top. Okay, I'm going to do that and continue that all the way around the bead until I get down to my very last bead. And on that one, as this comes out through the top, I will be entering down through the top of this bead and then securing it, and it'll make that bead lay flat. See how he's kind of like freewheeling it over here? He's kind of, not where he should be. When you work all the way around, and it'll become obvious, you need to go down and then through the back. Now, if you use, if I were using smoke fireline, you would not be able to see any of this on the back at all. Okay, you can see it because I did not use the smoke color, so you can see those stitches. But if I was using smoke, you would not be able to see that. And in case you don't believe me, this was done with smoke, and you can't see those stitches. They don't show up. So if you're working with a dark leather, you definitely want to use the smoke colored fireline on the back, because you need also to catch enough leather on the back to secure these beads down. Now, another thing you can do, if you wanted to do like a little picot stitch, with 3 beads on there, you can get decorative and do some different things. On this one, that's exactly what I did. You can see I came up and I basically did the same little stitch. I just did it with 3 beads, and it created a little bit different edge around it. This is probably, in my opinion, the nicer finished edge if you're trying to get a nice straight edge. It just helps the beads to lay really nicely. Okay, and once you have that done, really that's going to finish your edge. And if you've done a bracelet, or if you have done, separate pieces and components, now they're ready for you to assemble however you would like them to be. Okay, so bead embroidery is actually really easy. Have fun with it. you know, if you make a mistake, if you don't like your work, tear it out, and you know, you can start over. So I hope this was helpful, and have a wonderful day.